Hi there, I'm the underscore twig, and I like analysing game rules. We have a new monster manual. This is the book that I've been most excited for, probably ever since I started playing D&D, and it is great. I'm sure that by now, most of you have heard or seen other channels talking about how threatening the Mind Flayer's auto-stun is, or pointing out that the Lich has at-will shield and counterspell. On this channel though, we're not interested in pedestrian things like individual monsters. Oh no, we're going to look at the statistics. I have compiled a big database of all 504 monsters in this book, and I've been using it to do all sorts of fun calculations. In this particular video, I'm going to be covering all of the monsters' defences, things like HP, AC, saves, and damage resistances. Offences will hopefully come later, but they are a lot harder to analyse. There's a lot more information that goes into them. I will not be publishing my raw dataset because I don't fancy getting sued, but the graphs, charts, and tables will all be available in the description. We'll start off by looking at the population, how many monsters there are of each challenge rating. Here's a bar chart. We have a huge amount of monsters at low CRs, up to about CR 8, but then it really starts to decline. Wherever we have less than 5 monsters, I'm going to be considering the population to be limited, meaning that my calculated statistics are of relatively poor quality. That's CRs 14, 18, 19, 22 and 24 plus. Although I must say that I don't care too much about anything over CR 20. They skew the data anyways because they are designed to be significantly stronger than anything 20 or below. Of particular interest, CRs 18 and 19 only have a population of 1, and at CR 18 is the Demi-Lich, which is a massive outlier with very low HP, AC and strength saves. Let's look at this in another way. At several points in this video, I will group CRs into ranges, primarily to make the data easier to read. These will be CRs 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and 21 plus. And here's our grouped populations. Right, there is one singular complaint in this video, and unfortunately it has to be right at the beginning. After this, everything is good. This spread is awful. Only 38 monsters between CRs 11 and 15. I'm not saying that I don't want 338 low CR monsters, that's great, but seriously, cut that in half and give us a good 40 more in each of the higher CR groups. This here is not enough to make a compelling high-level campaign without it feeling intensely samey. We really need to increase those high CR populations. Fortunately, if you join my Patreon, you are statistically far more likely to increase the population, unless you happen to be gay or asexual, in which case, hey, you're welcome too. You also get early access to these videos, even earlier access to a lot of the statistics and calculations in my Discord, and haha funny bard joke, roll to seduce the dragon, god please shut up, that's such a boring character archetype. SK, Mark Rainbow and Biney are especially sexy, and are on a crusade to bring the pompadour back into fashion. So then, now that we have our population, let's have a look at HP, and we'll do this on a graph. On all of these graphs, the blue line will be the mean average value at each CR, the red line will be the lowest value, and the green line will be the highest value. Aside from a few obvious spikes and troughs, that's actually fairly linear. In fact, if we remove the max and min to declutter, as well as CR 21 plus and the Demi-Lich outlier at CR 18, you can put a very convincing line of best fists on that graph. For anyone interested, here's the equation for that line to one decimal place. As you can see, it's actually quite nice numbers, which makes me wonder if this was deliberate. This is slightly higher than in 2014, but not much. For example, a CR 10 would be expected to have about 16 more HP. That's enough to soak up 1, maybe 2 extra attacks. HP is only one half of the puzzle though. Let's look at AC. Okay, first thing that I want to point out here is that we start seeing monsters with 20 AC as early as CR 4. Personally, 20 is my cutoff. I very rarely like giving monsters that much. Going back to our average line though, we again see something reasonably linear. Again, it's slightly higher than in 2014, although more so at low CRs than high CRs. A CR1 monster would be expected to have about 0.7 higher AC, but a CR20 would only be expected to get plus 0.3. Now, some of my longer term viewers will have seen this magic trick before, but we have the HP and we have the AC, and that means that we can calculate the overall survivability of each monster. Let's say that you're playing in a party of 4 warlocks, and your level is equal to the monster's CR. All you're going to do is cast Hex and Eldritch Blast. how many turns does it take you to kill the monster. As an example, against a CR 13 Beholder with AC 18, each of our 4 level 13 Warlocks would be expecting to do about 29 damage per round, or roughly 115 damage per round for the whole party. The Beholder has 190 HP, so divide that by the 115 and it can survive around 1.7 rounds. For this graph, I'm only going to do the average, and I'm only going to really consider 1 to 20, since outside of that range it gets a bit funky. The blue line is 2024, and the yellow line is 2014. As an example, let's look at CR12. If you use a single CR12 monster against a party of 4 level 12 Warlocks, in 2024 you'd be expecting your monster to survive 1.75 turns, but in 2014 you'd only expect it to survive 1 turn. In every CR except 1 and 4, the 2024 line is higher. Those HP and AC increases compound together, meaning that we can expect monsters to survive longer. Except, actually probably not. Player damage has increased fairly substantially in 2024, and I'm not convinced that these small boosts will result in longer fights. I don't have any way of proving that without a significant amount of extra work, but that's my gut feeling. Fortunately for us, they have also changed the combat XP budget, which means that you can probably expect to fight more monsters in a single combat. Also worth noting is that none of these statistics take into account the monster's features and abilities. For example, I'm not considering the fact that the Lich's AC is probably functionally 20, not 15, because it has at-will shield. The last thing to point out about this graph, almost everything is within the range of 1.5 to 2 rounds, with a few CRs peaking above 2. If you've watched my video on Bigby's, Planescape and the Book of Many Things, you might remember that I found basically the same result. I don't think that this is enough for how I personally like to DM, although if you like combats with lots of monsters or want many short combats rather than a big long boss fight, it's probably okay. If you just want some napkin math for your combats though, I think that saying 6 to 8 rounds per monster divided by the number of quote Warlock equivalents in your party should be a decent metric. For example, I think that an optimized Barbarian can probably count as maybe 2 or even 3 Warlock equivalents. It's a bit esoteric, but could be useful with some experimentation. Obviously, decrease the number of rounds if you use lower CR monsters. Right, one more thing for AC before we move on. As a player, you don't actually care what the number in the stat block is, you care about your chance to hit the enemy. So let's have a look at that. If you start with an ability modifier of +3 and boost your stats at 4 and 8, how likely are you to hit an average monster? Well, we can see that it fluctuates pretty firmly in the range of 60 to 70%. Let's simplify this a bit and look at our CR groups. It's sitting at roughly 65% for the vast majority of the game. That means that for damage calculation purposes, maybe we should be using 65% chance to hit when making builds. I know some people already do that. I think Pack Tactics already uses 65%. But I personally have always done 60%, and so have people like Trian Monk. Genuine question for the comments. What do you think about the use of 60% chance to hit versus 65% chance to hit? What this also tells us is that when designing the monsters, they have not been considering magic items. That means that your +3 sword will actually make you hit more often, rather than it just being an illusion which is masked by the maths. How you address that as a DM is up to you. Just adding more monsters isn't always the best idea, so maybe you might actually have to bump those AC numbers every so often. Okay, let's move on from attack rolls and start looking at saving throws. I think that just looking at the bonuses here isn't very useful, so I'm going to skip a step and jump straight over to the chance to fail a save. I'm going to show 6 graphs in quick succession, followed by a 7th with the average lines of all saves together, so that you can compare them. Here's the chances that an enemy will fail its strength save, its dexterity save, its constitution save, its intelligence save, its wisdom save, and its charisma save. And here's everything together. It's a bit of a cluttered graph, but we can see that the orange intelligence line is pretty consistently high, meaning that monsters are likely to fail their saves. And the light blue and brown constitution and wisdom lines are near the bottom, so monsters are likely to succeed on their saves. Let's make this a bit easier to read with our table of CR groups. Much like the 2-hit table, this shows that monster saves actually aren't moving all that much. Magic items which increase your DC will make you more likely to land your spells. What I really like about this one though is that it finally gives me a good idea of how likely a monster is to fail a save. For Strength, Dex, Con and Whiz, we can make a fairly reasonable estimation of 55% chance to fail, but if it's a Charisma save it goes up to 65%, and for Intelligence it's a whopping 70% chance to fail. Let's put that into context. A Fireball upcast to 5th level is 10d6 halved on a Dex save. With 55% chance to fail, that's 27 damage. Synaptic Static is 8d6, but it's an int save. With 70% chance to fail, that's 24 damage. That 3 damage difference is the value of a better damage type in Psychic, as well as minus 1d6 on all future saves. Well worth it in my opinion. Do note that once again I am not considering things like magic resistance and legendary resistance in these figures. Okay, so I just said that Psychic is a better damage type than Fire, but how confident in that am I? Very, because I've already seen the results for this next part. We're now going to look at damage resistances, immunities and vulnerabilities. There is way too much data for a graph to be useful, so we're jumping straight into the CR groups. And I've also pre-sorted by what I consider to be best to worst. Apologies if you're colourblind, I couldn't find a palette with 13 different accessible colours. This shows what percentage of monsters are resistant, immune and vulnerable to each damage type. Completely as expected, Poison is the worst damage type in the game and Force is the best. In fact, there isn't a single monster in this entire book which interacts with Force damage. What's really interesting to me though is that there are basically only 6% of monsters that are resistant or immune to bludgeoning, piercing and slashing. That's way less than I was expecting. All of those features that let you change your damage types are probably just ribbons in the vast majority of cases. The only ones that are pretty much objectively better are Force of course, as well as Radiant and Thunder. Except that by tier 3 your BPS damage is actually probably still better, and Radiant absolutely dies a death in tier 4. It's terrible. I'm just going to bring your attention to this 2.6% damage vulnerability in CRs 11 to 15. That is one monster, the Rakshasa, and it's the only monster in the entire book with a complex interaction. All of the resistant to non-magical weapons or vulnerability to silver weapons and stuff like that are gone, except for in the Rakshasa, which is vulnerable to piercing damage from weapons wielded by creatures under the effects of a Bless spell. Got to say, I find that absolutely bizarre, but okay. Last thing which I can show you today, here's the percentage of monsters immune to each condition. Not a huge amount of interesting stuff to say for this one, other than the fact that Fear is slightly more reliable than Hypnotic Pattern, Cunning Strike Poison is pretty unreliable, and there are very few targets that you can't use Stunning Strike on until very late game. Interestingly, the Crawling Claw is immune to Incapacitated but not stunned or paralysed, so it can still technically take actions if you Stunning Strike it, assuming that you somehow don't kill it through its 2 HP. That's everything that I have for you today. Next video will be monster offenses, which I am super interested in. There's a lot of changes to attacks which make them seem far more dangerous than before, including more damage and a lot of automatic on-hit effects. I also want to check how many monsters have ranged options and how many can do significant non-bludgeoning, piercing or slashing damage. Subscribe so you don't miss that, or if you want more maths now, check out this video, where I looked at over 40 builds by Treant Monk to mathematically derive a benchmark for average damage. Bye!